Welcome to another edition of Footprints in American History. Today, we're going to talk about part 2 of the original fact checkers. Now, last week we did part 1, which was about Tokyo Rose. Now, let me just, for those of you who may not have seen last week's video, explain what a fact checker is. Now, the original purpose of a fact checker was actually very good. It was to make sure people got the truth. Like if a politician was in a debate with somebody, or they gave a speech, or maybe there was a publication or some other form of media that would make a statement, the purpose of a fact checker was to correct any omissions or correct anything that may have been stated the wrong way. That was the original purpose, was just to make sure people knew the truth. Now, in recent years, which is kind of why this title was done this way, was a little bit to have fun at their expense. Social media has been doing a lot of fact checking. However, unfortunately, some of the stuff they're doing as far as fact checking is not necessarily true with what they're saying. And the person who may have made the statement originally is telling the truth. So it's come under fire, so I decided to have a little fun with it. However, it kind of ties into the message of today's video about fact checking, which is trying to change the narrative from what the truth is to what they want you to believe. Now, in this case, we're going to go back to World War II once again. Tokyo Rose was from the Japanese theater. Now we're going to look at the European theater and the propaganda that went on there. Now, the first person we're going to speak about is Lord Haw Haw. He was known as William Joyce. He actually was from New York City. However, as he was growing up, he developed this fascination with fascism. He loved fascism. Now, after New York, he did spend several years in Ireland. However, because of this fascination with fascism, he ended up going to Germany. Now, and this was in 1940 when he ended up in Germany. Now, when he first got there, he had trouble finding work. But he loved brawling, and he had very, very powerful oratory skills, which got him noticed quickly. Because of these oratory skills, he ended up doing a propaganda radio show aimed at Britain. And Germany really wanted to defeat the British. Now, during this time, he would do these broadcasts. He became known as Lord Haw Haw. Now, there was originally another Lord Haw Haw. However, when William Joyce took over the role, he became known as Lord Haw Haw himself. Now, his broadcasts were aimed at discouraging not only the British military, but also the British public. You need to understand what was happening in British at this time with the English. They were getting very heavily censored media information, so they were not learning a lot of information about the war. Now, with Lord Haw Haw, he did provide a lot of information. Granted, he was the enemy, but at least they were hearing something. And because of it, and these oratory skills, he got quite the audience in England. He had, at the height of his career, he had 8 million listeners in Britain, and that was regular listeners. If you factored in the occasional listeners, add another 18 million people. They wanted to hear information. Now, he would start off every broadcast with his British aristocratic voice, Germany calling, Germany calling, Germany calling. He would often go on to rants, and he would say these things that were very sarcastic, ridiculing, very arrogant, but that was his personality. Now, he had to move more than once because of the Allied bombing. When the war ended, his last broadcast was only a few days before Germany surrendered. The military on the Allied side caught up to him near the Denmark border shortly afterward. Now, because he had lied to get a British passport, that ended up being his demise. Lord Haw Haw, William Joyce, was charged with treason, and they would not have been able to do it. However, he had lied to get the British passport. That gave them the excuse, and he did get executed. Now, there was somebody executed the next day. However, that gentleman was executed for treachery, but not treason. Now, it was learned only in the last 25 years that William Joyce's wife had also been facing treason charges. However, what was unknown until recent times was that he had managed to negotiate a deal with prosecutors not to have her charged with treason. He did not want his wife being executed also. They honored the request, and she lived out a full life. Now, we're going to talk about two other people that were involved in the propaganda efforts on the front. Now, you have to think about this. This is what was going on during all of these battles during World War II in the European theater. So these people were a daily conversation for most of these Allied soldiers at one point or another. They were listening to the enemy. The enemy believed in the power of propaganda, and they used it very much against the Allies, although they did not have much effect. The next person we're going to talk about is Axis Sally. Now, Axis Sally was very, very well known by the soldiers who were serving in the European theater. She started calling herself Sally. However, the GIs ended up calling her Axis Sally. It's thought that maybe the name Sally originated because her name was Mildred Gillers. She was from Maine. She ended up going to school at Ohio Wesleyan. She ended up coming to France, and then from France to Germany. She fell in love with a German, and in 1941, the State Department was telling Americans, you need to get out, you need to get out now. However, because she was in love with this German, he told her, look, it's over if you leave. So she decided to stay on. Sadly for him, he ended up being killed not very long after this. So it was thought that because of a radio interview she did, she referred to herself as a regular Sally, that's where the Sally name came from. However, the soldiers added on the Axis Sally to her. She actually had a show. She had 3 shows, but the main one she was known for was called Home Sweet Home. Began with a train whistle, and then she would start doing the show. She played popular music, so a lot of Americans enjoyed this because she played a lot of really popular swing music of the time. The soldiers loved listening to her because of the music. And she did have a way of talking to the GIs that made them enjoy listening to her. However, she did get some nicknames along the way. One of them was the Blank of Berlin, which I will not repeat this word. Also, Berlin Babe, Olga, Sally, and most of them knew her as Axis Sally. Now, she would also do, just like Tokyo Rose or any other soldier-oriented shows, trying to tell them it's better to surrender, you should try not to fight. They would try to demoralize the soldiers. And so when she did it, a lot of the people actually found it laughable. However, they listened because they enjoyed listening to her show. But she often had intelligence with these broadcasts, so she was also being listened to. Now, she did a show called Vision of Invasion. Now, this was the one that ultimately got her when she came back to the United States. Now, Vision of Invasion was broadcast on May 11th, 1945, nearly a month before the D-Day invasion. They knew that the Americans and the Allies were coming, and they didn't know where, but they knew they were coming. So she was part of a play that was written by a German who worked with her and produced the show for her, and she played in this radio show called Vision of Invasion, where she played an Ohio mother whose son was tragically killed in an attack on a ship in the English Channel. And it was very graphic. They had sounds of death, the people being killed during this show, and this ultimately was what got her convicted of treason later on. Now, in Mildred's case, she had done actually 3 shows. The main one was Home Sweet Home, but she also did one called Midget the Mic. It was very anti-Semitic in its overtones, and there were a lot of attacks on Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was the President of the United States. Now, the one I also wanted to mention here was the other show she did. These shows were on shortwave radio, so it was being heard in North Africa, it was being heard all over Europe, but it was also being heard in the United States, and the Nazis knew this. So because of the shortwave radio broadcasts being able to be heard in the United States, they wanted to create anxiety for people at home. And it was actually not as effective as what happened with Vietnam years later when they had the television that was covering all the death and the carnage going on in Vietnam. Well, it was the same intended consequences, and it was designed to scare American families back home. And it was called GI's Letterbox and Medical Reports. Now, what happened was she pretended she would go with a couple of German officers to POW camps, but also hospitals where they would have captured soldiers or captured pilots. And what they would do was they would have her masquerade as an International Red Cross representative. She would interview these people and ask them, where are you from? And talk to them about their hometown and ask them, do you have any messages for your families back home? Well, of course they're going to want to talk to their families back home. However, what would happen is they would take these messages and then edit them to make it sound like they were sympathetic to the Nazis when they weren't. And this was a very big propaganda tool that was being aimed at the United States audiences. Now, as I said, she ended up being charged with several counts of treason, but the only one that counted was visions of invasion that she had done just before D-Day. She ended up being sent to a prison in West Virginia. It was the same one that Tokyo Rose had been sent as well to serve her time. Now, she was eligible after a number of years for parole. She ended up, that was 1959, she ended up staying till 1961, a full 2 years later, before she even applied for parole, because she was so worried about the public scorn that she was going to receive when she got out of prison. When she did get out, she ended up moving back to Ohio. She converted to Catholicism. She ended up being a kindergarten music teacher. And she ended up dying of colon cancer. The next person we're going to talk about is another Axis Sally, except this was from Italy. The third and final person we're going to discuss is another Axis Sally. Her name was Rita Luisa Zucca. Now, Rita was an Italian-American who was from New York City. Her father owned a very popular Italian restaurant there. She went to live in Florence in a convent school. That was in 1938. Now, in 1941, the Mussolini government was making some very powerful moves that scared her. One of them that worried her was they were going to seize her family property in Italy, so she renounced her American citizenship to prevent this from happening. She ended up going into radio. Now, the Mussolini government had seen what the Germans were doing with Axis Sally out of Berlin. They wanted something to deal with the U.S. and Allied soldiers that were in Italy. So they began broadcasting to the soldiers who were fighting in Italy. And Rita was one of these people. Now, she called herself Sally also, and she got known to many of the GIs. They confused her with the other Axis Sally. And for Mildred Gillers, she learned about this and was very, very irritated to no end. Now, on July 8th, 1943, this was what Rita said while the Allies were getting ready to invade Sicily. She said, quote, "The wonderful boys of the 504th Parachute Regiment, that Colonel Willis Mitchell's Playboys, the 61st Troop Carrier Group are going to carry you to certain death. We know where and when you are jumping, and you will be wiped out." Very much propaganda to scare the Allies in Italy. Unfortunately for them, the Allies actually were moving north in Italy, so she was forced to move further north. She had to leave Rome and go to Milan. Now, when she did get captured, she did get brought back to the United States, and she faced military tribunal. When they did bring her, the American newspapers ridiculed her. Nobody had known what she had looked like. They were curious to see what this other Axis Sally looked like. Well, she was cross-eyed, so they ridiculed her, and one newspaper even said cross-eyed, bow-legged, and sallow-skinned. She died in 1948. I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Jeff Dial. If you like these videos, please like and share. Also, please subscribe to the channel, and if you really enjoy the videos, ring the bell so you can get notifications whenever a new video comes out. Also, look at our Facebook group, Footprints in American History. You'll learn about previous stories as well as upcoming releases, and there are also often stories that are posted that did not go on the YouTube channel. In the meantime, have a great day, fair winds, and following seas.